Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. And before we get into this one, I'm going to have to say it's going to be a very difficult video to do because of the subject matter of it. I'm going to try not to get angry, but I will tell you straight up, it is an awful video about the most terrible people. A lot of the terms I'm not even going to be able to say the words because of YouTube, so we'll have to basically use alternative terms, which I hope you can follow as we're dealing with it. And it's all to do with a group of predominantly men in the legal profession who back from the 80s onwards, or late 80s, early 90s onwards, basically used their children and passed their children around and other people's children for their own pleasurement. It was massive abuse on an industrial scale. And one of the victims of this, who wants to come forward, wants to give evidence, has been excluded from this inquiry. Now, this inquiry has been going on for 7 years. Why is it being dragged out so long? And why are people in positions to give information not being allowed to do so? Now, I'm going to hazard a guess that the longer they can drag it out, the fewer people will still be alive to actually face any kind of punishment, because given the time frames, and also it allows other people to secure deals, to ensure that a lot of information is lost, that witnesses are no longer available, that kind of thing. I also feel, and this is something that strikingly would be very worrying, is that there may well have been people who were in more junior positions back that length of time ago, who subsequently have risen to very senior positions within the establishment, and who desperately want this to be covered up and remain a secret, and for whom the truth must never, ever come out. But we're going to have a look at it, and we're going to see why this woman, Susie Henderson, has been disbarred from ever giving evidence to this inquiry. And I think it's obvious why. Anyway, we're going to have a look. Like I say, it's a difficult subject, so bear with me. Here goes. So, survivor of Scott's Magic Circle P's, those files, excluded from a child abuse inquiry. Susie Henderson, who was abused by her father and others within the legal profession, has hit out, which I'm going to skip over that. This is Susie Henderson. So, a survivor of sexual abuse by members of the legal establishment in Scotland claims she has been excluded from the child abuse inquiry. Susan Henderson, 56, suffered years of abuse at the hands of her father, Robert Henderson QC, and many of his friends in legal circles. But she says she's been made to feel like her abuse didn't matter, as it's not being examined in the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry set up to examine institutional sex cases. They don't want this woman giving evidence because of who she is, the names she knows, the people's names that she could mention, and if doing so within the inquiry means that she could be freed from prosecution. You can name things in a court and in an inquiry that you couldn't name in public. You're given that protection in law. And they do not want this woman under oath in a court, in a court of inquiry, being able to freely name names. So they are desperately trying to make sure that she does not get heard, because otherwise there'd be people out there who would be in deep trouble. Henderson was a key player in the Magic Circle scandal of the early 90s, where it was claimed that senior lawyers, including judges who were secretly gay, who were conspiring to pervert the course of justice, and who were, of course, were massively abusing children left, right and centre. It has emerged in recent months that the circle was little more than a smokescreen for the P ring that Henderson orchestrated. Her father was the ringleader of this. Victims who were abused at home are excluded from this inquiry, which has been running for 7 years. Susie says her abusers were among the most powerful people in Scotland and that it should investigate. She added, "I knew it was primarily about children in care, but where do people go that have been abused by the Faculty of Advocates, one of Scotland's most powerful institutions? Do we pursue a separate inquiry?" She says, "Our voices are our voices not worth hearing? It makes me feel as though somehow I'm less important or that my suffering is not as bad because my abusers were my father and his many friends." Members of the Faculty of Advocates clearly knew because several were involved. Some of them worked as prosecutors within the Crown Office. Is that not a matter of national significance that should be investigated by the inquiry? The inquiry does not want to touch on these matters. The inquiry does not want to look at the Crown Office and the people within it, because some of them may well still be there, and it would then utterly destroy everyone at the Crown Office. Indeed, the whole Crown Office would have to be disbanded and changed and built from the ground up again. It's that serious. This is one of the major scandals of our time, and it's being covered up. And the SNP have been running this inquiry now for 7 years. They are the ones who set it up and then allowed it to run for 7 years. Still nowhere near conclusion. Still submitting that people cannot speak to the inquiry because of what they know, the names they could name. And it makes you wonder if it was limited just to the legal profession. Were there others involved? Were there senior SNP people involved? Were there people who were young and impressionable and enjoying themselves at the time, who suddenly risen to very, very high ranks within the SNP? I am saying nothing. I am naming no names. The Scottish Government and the inquiry agreed that Susie's case and similar ones cannot be considered. Then what are the Scottish Government saying to an independent inquiry that this woman cannot be heard? That's the whole point of it being independent. But they disagree on who is responsible for the terms of reference. In a reply to a request for comment on the matter from the record, a spokesman for the inquiry replied, "The inquiry's terms of reference are set by Scottish ministers and specify the areas the inquiry has the power to investigate. The inquiry cannot look at anything outside its terms of reference." Well, surely, within that term of reference, the legal framework must be part of that term of reference. And if you can bring that legal framework in and show that the senior people involved within the legal profession themselves were guilty of this, then the whole legal profession needs to be investigated as part of that inquiry. When questioned in the Scottish Parliament in February about whether the inquiry could consider cases like Susie's, the then First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said, "The remit and conduct of a public inquiry is entirely for the inquiry, and the chair of the inquiry and the ministers cannot intervene in that." And yet they have. And yet they continue to do so. More lies, more cover-up, and they don't want this woman ever to be able to freely give information. A letter to Inquiry Chair Lady Smith on behalf of Susie, said by MSP Russell Findlay, who had posed the question to Sturgeon, made the case for extending the inquiry's remit. He wrote, "Susie believes the SCAI represents a last chance for her and that it should deploy its powers to investigate the scale of these allegations." Scottish Tory Justice spokesman said, "There seems to be two classes of child abuse victims in Scotland. Those whose voices are now rightly being heard by the inquiry and those who were met with a closed door because they do not want this woman giving evidence. It would destroy them. They know it. And so that is why they've barred it from day one. No, no, no. These people must not ever give evidence. It would utterly destroy the entire Scottish legal profession." A Scottish Government spokesman said, "While survivors of all historical abuse have our deepest sympathies, any widening of the inquiry's remit would risk delaying publication of its findings by a matter of years. It's been 7 years now. It's already been 7 years. What does a couple more matter? And if this woman can give the information and name the names, then that would go some way to sorting out one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in this country. There are senior people that do not want this woman to speak because of the name she would name. And one of them is very much a public figure. That's all I'm going to say on that matter. And so it's no wonder that she is being kept quiet. Let's put it that way. She's been deliberately silenced by the inquiry because they cannot allow her to speak. And that is the state of justice in Scotland. I'm stopping and I'm coming up. If you want to know more about this list, there was a list, you see. It's very important that you know this. There was a list that was debunked. And there was a lot of names on that list. And the list existed, and it had Lord Dervard, who resigned in 1989 because he was on the list that the police had. So he quietly resigned and nothing more came of it. John Watt got given 10 years. I think he got 10 years, something like that. It was Colin Tucker. He got a load of time. These people are all there, but there was this whole list with all these names on it. And some of these names were quite well known. They're absolutely well known. And the police were told to investigate, and then they were stopped from investigating. And that is another question on another video. Why did the police have their investigation halted? Who was on that list? Who was on that list whose name could never come out? There was a long list, apparently. And then subsequent investigations have said, oh no, there was no list. But policemen who were involved knew there was a list. The chairman of, the editor of, I think, the Scotsman knew that there was a list. Some senior BBC people not only knew there was a list, but recognised some of the names. That is to say, that some of the names on the list, that this is the list that Henderson had. And some of the people on the list were known to the BBC because they were employees of the BBC. Henderson had a list of all those people that were gay, judges, gay solicitors and that. It was quite legal to be gay, but it was frowned upon in the public view. And it would have made their lives difficult. Plus, some of them were married with children and didn't want it coming out. And he knew that some were basically peas. And he was blackmailing them. And he wanted them to do his daughter. She was 7 when he started doing it. And he would pass her around at parties and watch as grown men did her. You know, these are the people who were running Scotland. And if you think that anything's different now, look again. Look at what you get in Scotland for hiring a child. 270 hours community service. Do you think anything's changed since the late 80s, early 90s? Or do you think it's just gone a little bit further underground? And it's maybe why they don't want this woman to give evidence. It all adds up, really, doesn't it? The whole of the Scottish legal profession is just one giant, degenerate, filth-strewn pea ring. And who heads it? Well, it was at one point. Humza Yousaf was the Justice Minister, but we can make no direct connection, of course. Of course not. I wouldn't suggest anything like that. Whether you think it or not, of course, is a different matter. It's filth, isn't it? It's a disgusting bag of filth. But I'll stop now. Thank you very much for watching. If you like what you're seeing here on the channel, please hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, leave a like, leave a comment, please share the video. And remember that not everyone in the legal profession is like this, but it does seem to be rather a lot of them. Be careful. Bye.